So a joke popped up on my thing that I think I shared with you a few years ago, but I still laugh, so I'm going to share it again. And just to make sure that you're awake this morning. But there were these three ministers at a ministerial group, and one was a rabbi, one was a Protestant, and one was a Catholic, and they were talking about their little town in Alaska that was being overrun by these grizzly bears, and they didn't know what to do, so they said, well, the town can't get rid of these bears, what are we going to do? We're going to try. So they all said, well, this coming week, we're going to try to figure out how to get rid of the bears and all of this. So the next week they have the meeting, and the Catholic priest walks in, and he's got a little bit of a cut on him and a little bruise, and he says, well, that didn't go as bad as I thought, I just sprinkled him with a little bit of holy water, and I haven't seen the bear again. And so then the Protestant came up and said, well, and he was kind of a little more beat up a little bit, and he's like, well, I tried to give the bear communion because I figured that he needed the body of Christ, and I did that, and I got a little too close, but the bears haven't come back. And so the rabbi shows up, and the rabbi is broken, and he's got broken bones, and he's ripped up, and he just doesn't know what to do. And he just looked at the priest and the Protestant and said, yeah, I shouldn't have started with the circumcision. You're welcome, because that's funny. Okay, but now that you're laughing, we're going to talk about owning our own actions here this morning. Okay, so what I want to talk to you about is, we talked about this before, but in Joshua, there's this great verse in the 24th chapter that says, choose this day whom you will serve. And Joshua is telling his people, listen, you have to decide. And Joshua even says in there, if you'll pull up that verse for us this morning, Ray. And this is in the book of Joshua, and we're going to read verses 14 through 15, and it says this, so now, fear God, worship Him in total commitment, get rid of the gods your ancestors worshipped on the far side of the river, the Euphrates, and in Egypt, you worship God. If you decide that it's a bad thing to worship God, then choose a God you'd rather serve and do it today. Choose one of the gods your ancestors worshipped from the country beyond the river, or one of the gods of the Amorites on whose land you're now living. As for me and my family, we'll worship God. And there's other versions that say, as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. He says, choose this day whom you will serve. So Joshua is telling his people, he's saying, listen, you have a choice to make. You can either choose God like we are and what we're supposed to be doing, and as far as me and my house, we are going to worship God. But if you don't want to worship God, pick somebody and worship Him. You can't have best of both worlds and straddle the fence. Choose this day whom you will serve. And I love that verse because to me, it's one of those verses that really gets to the heart of the matter and is a very blunt verse that says, listen, you have a choice to make. It is up to you. You have to decide, are you going to choose God or are you going to choose against God? Are you going to choose some other thing that you think is going to make you happy, or are you going to choose the source of contentment and love and grace? It is up to you, but you decide. And I think that we can still ask ourselves those questions today, because in today's world, nobody wants to take responsibility for their own actions anymore. And somebody gets caught, when somebody gets hurt, when something happens, it's never my fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And I'm speaking to myself this morning. I remember years ago, somebody at the church in Lanark let us use their boat. And we went out for a boat with my sister and her boyfriend and some other people. It was a big pontoon boat. And here's the thing. I did not know what I was doing. Okay, they just said, take the boat, get it out of the slip, and go on the lake. So I did that. I crashed into a couple boats, like not bad, but just like dinged them a little bit. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I didn't know that there was an anchor to the boat. So when I started it up, the rope got wrapped up in the propeller, and then the boat was just floating around, right? And I'm in the marina, and literally there are like 4 other boats trying to get out, but I'm just floating in the middle of all these boats going, I don't know what to tell you. We're stuck. But then as I found the rope under there and I'm trying to get the rope off, I started to blame somebody else that didn't even, I think it was my sister's boyfriend. I don't even remember his name, right? And I just said, well, why didn't you get the rope? Why didn't you do this? And then Amanda had to yell at me and say, John, this is your own fault, right? But my reaction, instead of saying, yes, I messed up, I was embarrassed, I didn't know what to do, so I just wanted to blame somebody else. And we do that all of the time. And that is something silly. That is something just silly. But we do that. We don't want to take responsibility. Look at our world today. How many people sue people because they get hurt even though it was their own fault? Like I think we talked about this before years ago when this whole crazy thing of suing people started, where somebody went to McDonald's and decided, yes, it's a smart idea to put hot coffee in my lap without a lid while I'm driving, and then sues McDonald's and wins. Right? Because we don't want to take responsibility. And it is no different. I find no different in our spiritual lives. How many times I talk to people, or how many times I'm thinking about taking an inventory of my own life, and I start to say, well, I'm not as close to God because of this, because somebody made me upset, or because I didn't have opportunities, or this or that. I never say to myself, I'm bad, or I'm not in a good spot spiritually because I just haven't paid attention, or I haven't put in the time, or I haven't put in the effort. I always want to blame somebody else, and I want to go to God and say, you know what, Lord, I've had so many excuses here. It's not my fault I haven't come to you. But I have to believe that God stands there and says, John, choose this day whom you will serve. You made a choice. You make a choice all of the time. You're either going to follow me or you're not. So there's a couple things I want to highlight here this morning about how we have to take ownership of our spiritual lives and not start to palm that off on other things, and choose this day. Because if we're going to grow as a church, if we're going to get people excited, if we're going to go on this new vision, we have to decide what we're going to be about. We have to decide that today we are going to serve the Lord, and we're going to serve the Lord in this way. So one is, the first thing we have to do is say, if we are going to do the right thing, it starts with, again, taking responsibility for our actions. So a gospel story this morning. In the 25th chapter of Matthew, you have a story of the virgins. If you remember the virgins that ran out of the oil lamp when the groom was going to show up. And if you read it, it's a great parable, because in it Jesus is saying, you have to be ready. I'm telling you, everything in this book right here, I'm telling you, I'm coming back. Be ready. You have to be prepared. So these virgins just thought, well, they weren't that prepared. They ran out of their oil, and then they started asking other people, can I have your oil? Can you share with me this oil? And they were getting mad because nobody would share the oil with them, so they had to go off and get oil. And while they were off getting the oil, what happened in the story? Right? The bridegroom showed up, and they missed it. Right? It's no different. Right? I can't stand before God. You cannot stand before God. Right? And God say, okay, John, what did you do? Who did you serve? I'm not going to be able to say, well, Lord, I would have served you better, but so-and-so didn't give me any oil for my lamp. Or you know what? I would have served you better, but I went to a church where I didn't feel like I was fed. Or I didn't have these opportunities. And you know what God's going to say to me? I firmly believe it. John, that doesn't matter. It was your choice. You decided what to do. You decided to be with me or not anybody else's. You could have brought the oil just like they did. You could have done this. You could have paid attention. It is nobody's fault except yours where you are in your relationship with God. And I'm preaching to myself this morning because I know these last 3 months going through the grieving process, you lose track of things. But I can't blame anybody else. I can't even blame my brother who died and said, Lord, this is so tough on me, and my brother died, so I don't want anything to do with you because it's up to me. I decide either or not, I don't want anything to do with God today, or I want something to do with God today. We decide how we're going to act. I decide if I'm going to show up prepared or not. I decide if I'm going to stay connected or not. It is up to me. I need to figure that out. So taking responsibility. And with that, if I want to make better choices, I have to want to make better choices, right? So if I want to make something or I want to do something, I better make the choices that make that happen. God does require a commitment from us. Whether or not you are Republican or Democrat or progressive or conservative or anything, it really doesn't matter where you fall on that spectrum. There are still things that are expected from us that God tells us this is what we are supposed to do. Whether you are on this side of the spectrum or not, you still stay connected to me. Whether you are on this side of the spectrum or not, you serve each other. Whether you are on this side of the spectrum or not, you are to love and be with people. It doesn't matter. It doesn't give us an excuse, right? So I turn on the news and you hear all of these arguments, and they're always like, well, I'm right because I'm on this side, or I'm right on this side, and none of that matters. All it means is that you are trying and there's something expected and we have a job to do. So God says, choose this day whom you will serve. I have no other excuse but to say I either chose God or I did not choose God. So again, we want to have to do what is right. And if we want to follow Christ, want to follow God, then we need to know what that is, right? So we do Bible studies, we do home groups, we do all of these things to give you opportunities to connect to God. So when somebody comes up to me, okay, and they say, you know what, this church isn't feeding me, I'm not getting anything out of it. And people do this all the time, not just here at Oakland, but any church. You'll say, well, I'm not going to that church anymore because I didn't get anything out of it. I didn't go to that church anymore because there wasn't opportunities. Well, here I'm telling you that a lot of that is just nonsense and excuses. Because here we have Bible studies for you to offer from. We have Sunday school classes. We have service projects. We have home groups. We have youth. We have kids. Anything you want to do, we have for you to enjoy and to deepen your relationship with God and each other. But I decide whether or not I'm going to show up and participate in those things. So when somebody says, John, I'm not getting anything out of any of this, I have to say, well, first of all, it's not my job to spoon feed you. It's my job to show you where you can get the food. It's up to you to figure out how to make it and how to eat it and how to digest it. That is not my job. That is not the job of the church, is to cover you spiritually. The job of the church is to give you all of these opportunities to connect and to grow and to be with each other and to say, okay, God, here I am. What am I supposed to do? But it is our job, our responsibility to own that. And I know I sound a little harsh this morning, but I think that one of the ways the church is going to grow into the future is for people to realize that it's about themselves on some level. That before we can grow as a church, we have to be committed individually to God. We have to be plugged in to God. We have to say, okay, this is the mission and what we are following. And even though we don't know all of the details or how to all unpack that right now, we know we have a job, and that is to be faithful to God and to each other. So just like Joshua, we were always faced with that question. Choose this day whom you will serve. And I love that verse in there where it says, if it's not God, fine, just decide. Just make a choice and realize that that is the choice you made and how you're going to live by it. There's no excuses. I mean, it's convenient to be able to blame other people, and it makes us feel good every once in a while to say, well, yeah, this one wasn't really my fault, or whatever it is. But simplistically, it really does just come down to choose this day whom you will serve. And as far as me and my house, we will serve the Lord. You know, I see these babies out here, and we're going to have another dedication coming up. And I just think to myself, that is one way that we help people understand how we serve God, is by growing these kids and living in a way that says, as far as me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And these are the examples that we have. I don't know why I'm holding a baby like this, but here's the deal. And I know I'm rambling, but these last couple months has just got me to understand what is important and what is not important. And I'm starting to understand that this thing about faith and Christianity, how personal and how subjective it is, comes down to just being connected again to God and to each other. And if we can do that, if we can somehow tap into that and say we are part of something bigger, believe me, lives can change. Worlds can change. But it all starts with that one question. Choose this day whom you will serve. As far as me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Let us pray. Lord, gut us this morning. Confront us, however you want to word that, and help us to have to answer that question. Choose this day whom you will serve. So Lord, help us take stock of our lives. Help us to understand where we are, where we need to go. And help us to take some deep inventory of ourselves, to take ownership, to say, maybe I am not as connected right now because of the choices I've made. So Lord, as this moment, stand before us individually and ask us, who will we serve this day? So as we leave this place, be with us, walk with us, and let us know that you are God. And all of God's people said, Amen. If you'll please stand as they come to close us.